Welcome to Voices from Forgotten Souls. Today we bring you a rare story from St. Louis in Senegal. A story buried in the old French colonial records, whispered only by elders who still remember how one enslaved man found justice in the most unexpected way. This is the story of Nalo of Wolof, a young man who carried the memory of his people in his heart and the fire of revenge in his soul. Today we take you into the year 1819, to a place where cruelty ruled the soil, and where one man found an unlikely ally in a creature feared by many. Let us go into the shadows of St. Louis and witness a tale of survival, pain, and vengeance. In the year 1819, the French settlement of St. Louis stood like a scar on the banks of the Senegal River. The city was a mixture of stone houses, mud huts, slave warehouses, and the constant smell of misery drifting from the slave yards. The sky was usually bright, but the hearts of the enslaved people were always heavy. Every day, the sounds of chains dragged across the sand, mixing with the cries of the beaten and the orders barked by French overseers. Among the enslaved stood a young man named Nalo, a Wolof hunter taken from his village years earlier. Before his capture, Nalo had lived a peaceful life in a small Wolof settlement surrounded by trees, grasslands, and the echo of animal calls. His father had taught him how to read footprints in the soil, how to understand an animal's fear, and how to calm them without force. These lessons stayed buried inside him, even after he was shipped across the desert and sold in St. Louis. He had been in St. Louis for only 2 years, yet he felt as if he had aged a lifetime. His body carried the scars of the whip, but his mind carried something sharper than pain. He carried memory, and memory, in a place built on suffering, was dangerous. Nalo worked on a small plantation owned by a French merchant named Emile Barret. Emile was not known for kindness. He was known for his short temper, his love of wine, and his hatred for anyone who stood taller than him. He whipped men for working too slow. He slapped women for speaking. He locked children in storage huts when they cried too loudly. The enslaved people feared him, but Nalo watched him carefully. Nalo was not loud. He was not rebellious. He was not the kind of man who shouted or fought without reason. He spoke softly and moved silently. To Emile, this made him look weak. To the other enslaved people, it made him unpredictable. And unpredictable men were dangerous. One afternoon during the dry season, Emile whipped a pregnant woman named Cora because she asked for water. Her screams echoed through the entire plantation. Nalo heard the sound. He froze and closed his eyes. Something inside him shifted. Something long buried. Cora fell to the ground, and the overseer walked away without looking back. Her breathing was heavy, and the child inside her moved weakly. Nalo stepped forward and lifted her gently. He whispered to her in Wolof, telling her to breathe slowly, telling her she was not alone. But deep inside, he felt a fire burn. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Nalo sat outside near the edge of the plantation. He looked toward the dim lanterns glowing in the French quarters, then toward the dark wild beyond the settlement. The wild was dangerous, but danger was something Nalo understood. He remembered how, back home, older hunters spoke of wild animals that roamed the lands, lions, hyenas, snakes, all living in the balance of fear and hunger. He remembered his father saying that every animal has a reason for its behavior. Some attack when threatened, some attack when hungry, and some attack when led. Nalo's fingers trembled. He had tried to bury his old life, but now those memories returned like sparks from a dying fire. He looked toward the wilderness again. He looked toward freedom and toward vengeance. The next morning, Emil was still angry. He shouted at the enslaved workers, cursing them for mistakes they had not made. He kicked buckets, threw tools, and insulted everyone in his path. When he saw Nalo standing still, he walked up to him and struck him across the face. The slap echoed loudly. Nalo did not react. He did not raise his hand. He did not speak. He simply looked at Emil with calm, steady eyes. Something in those eyes unsettled Emil. For a moment, he hesitated. He felt as if he was standing too close to something he could not see, something cold and sharp. He pushed Nalo aside and continued shouting, but Nalo's calm stare had already planted a seed of fear. Days passed. The dry season grew hotter. Food became scarce. Water was rationed, and tempers rose. Cora survived, but her child stopped moving. The entire plantation fell into silence whenever she sighed or held her stomach. Nalo could not forget, and he would not forgive. One night, he slipped away from the plantation. He moved quietly. Careful not to wake anyone, he reached the outer edge, near the river where thick bushes grew. Crickets chirped loudly, and frogs croaked in the distance. The air was heavy with the smell of mud and vegetation. Nalo crouched low and looked around. He listened. Every hunter knows the world speaks through sound. Suddenly he heard a strange noise, something between a cough and a growl. His body tensed. He remained still. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. A hyena stepped forward slowly, its head low, its body tense. It was thin. Its ribs were visible. Its fur was rough and dirty. And yet its eyes were alive, sharp, and hungry. Nalo recognized the look. It was an animal, driven to desperation, but it was also wounded. He noticed a deep cut on its front leg. The animal limped slightly. Another person would have run. Another enslaved person would have screamed. But Nalo did not move. He and the hyena stared at each other. He breathed slowly, just as his father had taught him. Animals feel energy. If you panic, they react. If you remain calm, they hesitate. After a long moment, the hyena growled and stepped back. Nalo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of dried fish he had taken earlier. He placed it on the ground slowly. The hyena sniffed the air, then limped closer. It ate the fish. Its growls softened. For the first time in years, Nalo felt alive. He knew this encounter was not a coincidence. He knew nature had placed something in front of him. A possibility. A tool. A key. The next night, Nalo returned with more food. Not much, but enough. The hyena remembered him. It limped out of the bushes, cautious but curious. This time it came closer. Closer than the night before. Nalo did not try to touch it. He did not try to tame it. He only fed it. He knew the hyena was still wild. He knew it would never be a pet. But he also knew something else. Animals remember who feeds them. They return to the one who does not threaten them. And when hungry, they follow the scent they associate with food. Nalo understood this bond. Not a friendship, not control. Something in between. Something powerful. Something dangerous. As the days passed, the hyena returned each night. Its wound healed slowly. Its growls became softer when it saw Nalo. It never allowed him to touch it, but it no longer treated him as an enemy. Nalo began to study its behavior, how it moved, how it hunted, how it reacted to sound. He remembered what hunters in his village had taught him. Hyenas can track scents across long distances. They can smell blood from far away. They follow anything that smells like food or prey. They are patient. They wait. They circle. They strike when the victim is weak or alone. Nalo began to develop a plan. A dark plan. A dangerous plan. But a plan that fit the man Emile Barrett had become. A man who believed he could hurt others and walk away untouched. Nalo looked at the hyena and whispered, almost as if speaking to the night itself, "Justice is coming, and it will not come from a human hand. It will come from the wild. It will come from the darkness. It will come from a creature that knows suffering and hunger as deeply as the enslaved do." And Emile had no idea that his death was already moving toward him, quietly, on wounded paws, waiting for the moment to strike. The nights in Saint Louis grew heavier as the dry season deepened, and Nalo found himself walking toward the edge of the plantation more often than usual, always pretending to look for firewood or inspect the fishing nets near the river so that no one would suspect what he was truly doing. He moved quietly, always listening for the angry steps of Emile Barrett or the sudden voice of the overseer. He knew that the Frenchman believed enslaved people were too broken to plan anything. But Nalo was not broken. He was patient, and patience was something the French never understood. Each night the hyena appeared from the same thicket, its body stronger than before, its limp fading slowly. The moonlight always seemed to fall on its face in a strange way, making its eyes shine with an almost human sharpness. Nalo always approached carefully. He never rushed. He never acted like a predator. He would gently place pieces of dried fish or leftover scraps from the plantation kitchen on the ground and step back. The hyena ate slowly at first, but soon began to trust that the food would not harm it. Nalo spoke to it softly in Wolof, not because he believed it understood his words, but because he wanted his voice to become familiar. The voice of a man who would never strike it, never chase it, never threaten its life. He knew that animals may not understand words, but they understand tone. They understand calmness. They understand intention. Nalo also understood something else. He knew that every creature remembers where safety comes from, where food comes from, and where harm comes from. He wanted the hyena to remember him, not as a master, not as a friend, simply as something it could follow without fear. One night, as the sky grew darker and the stars came out in full brightness, Nalo noticed something new. The hyena did not wait in the bushes this time. It stood closer to the riverbank, as if expecting him. This meant the bond was working. Not a bond of affection, a bond of survival. The animal wanted food. Nalo wanted justice. Both were hungry for something, and hunger binds even the wildest of creatures. Nalo crouched down slowly. He held a piece of fish out in front of him. The hyena watched him with steady eyes. Its ears flicked. Its nose twitched. It sniffed the air and stepped forward. This time, it came so close that Nalo could feel its breath on his hand. He did not move. He kept breathing steadily. The hyena took the fish gently from his fingers. Then it stepped back and chewed. For a moment, Nalo felt a strange emotion inside him, something he had not felt since the day he lost his village. It was not joy. It was not hope. It was something deeper. It was remembrance. He remembered being a child, following his father into the forest, learning how animals think and how they judge danger. He remembered watching hunters calm frightened animals with nothing but presence. He remembered being told that no creature is truly untamable if you understand its pain. And this hyena had known pain just as deeply as he had. That night, Nalo made a silent promise. He would end Emil's cruelty. He would end the endless beatings. He would end the suffering of women like Cora. And he would do it using the oldest weapon known to humans. The wild. The next morning, the plantation woke to the sound of Emil shouting at a group of enslaved workers who had dropped a wooden beam while carrying it. He insulted them, calling them lazy and stupid. He walked to the woman nearest to him and pushed her so hard that she fell to the ground. Then he kicked her. The other workers turned away, helpless. Nalo stood in the distance, watching. His face was calm, but his mind was turning like a slow, grinding wheel. Emil had no idea that his cruelty had already signed his death sentence. Later that evening, Nalo sat with an elderly enslaved man named Arame, who had been on the plantation longer than anyone else. Aram was nearly 60 years old, thin but wise, with deep wrinkles around his eyes and a voice that carried sadness. He looked at Nalo and said, "You have been walking alone at night. I see you. I hear when you leave." Nalo did not answer. Arame lowered his voice. "The night carries dangers. Men disappear in the wild. Animals come out when the moon rises. You must be careful." Nalo nodded, but remained silent. Arame studied him, sensing that something heavy was growing within him. The old man placed a hand on Nalo's shoulder. "Do not let darkness lead you into a deeper darkness." Nalo looked at the ground. He wanted to tell Aram what he was planning, but he held back. He knew the old man would try to stop him, not because Aram supported Emil, but because Aram believed revenge always came with a price that enslaved people could not afford. That night, Nalo slipped away again, moving through the shadows with careful steps. He crossed the small riverbank, bent low, and listened for movement. The hyena was already there. It stepped out of the bushes, ears perked. Its body was no longer thin, and its limp was almost gone. Its coat looked healthier. Nalo felt a strange pride in seeing the animal recover. The hyena approached him and sniffed his clothes. Then it walked past him, circling around as if testing the air. Nalo watched how it moved. He noticed how it reacted to sudden noises, how it lowered its body when it sensed food nearby, how it listened for the faintest sounds. He also noticed something else. The hyena was beginning to associate his scent with food. This was important. This meant Nalo could lead it wherever he wanted, but he would not do it recklessly. He needed a plan that made sense, a plan that looked natural, a plan that ensured Emil would not only die, but die without suspicion, pointing toward any enslaved person. He needed the death to look like a wild animal attack. Something that happened in the night when Emil walked home alone, drunk and loud, as he usually did after drinking in the French quarters. Nalo remembered that the overseer often went to a small tavern near the edge of the settlement during the late evenings. He returned through a path that cut through a patch of tall grass, a place where wild animals sometimes passed, a place where the moonlight barely touched the ground, a perfect place for a final breath. Nalo spent several more nights studying the path. He walked it silently, imagining where the hyena would attack. He knew the animal would strike from the side. Hyenas do not attack from the front unless cornered. They prefer surprise. They prefer the moment when their prey is distracted. Emil was always distracted when drunk. He stumbled. He cursed. He laughed loudly at jokes only he could hear. Nalo imagined the scene. He imagined how fast the hyena would move, how the night would swallow the sound of the struggle, how the plantation would awaken to news that the overseer had been torn apart by a wild animal. But Nalo also knew He could not simply lead the hyena there. He needed the animal to smell something familiar, something tempting, something it already recognized. Food. And the strongest scent to draw a hyena was blood. He needed fresh meat, something with a strong scent, something that would make the hyena act without hesitation. One night, he slipped into the storage hut, where leftover animal parts were often thrown away after the cooks finished preparing meals for the Frenchman. He found a small bundle of goat intestines. The smell was strong. He wrapped them carefully in a piece of cloth and hid them under his clothes. The next night, he fed a small piece of the meat to the hyena. The animal's eyes widened, and its posture changed instantly. It growled softly, not in anger, but in hunger. It wanted more. Nalo stepped back slowly and let the hyena finish eating. Then he tied the remaining pieces tightly and saved them. He would only use them when the night of revenge arrived. For several days, Nalo watched Emil closely. He watched when he left the plantation. He watched how long he stayed at the tavern. He watched the path he took back home. One night, Emil drank too much and fell asleep near the tavern door. The Frenchman mocked him and poured wine on him as a joke. Emil woke up angry, swinging his arms in confusion. Nalo stood far away and watched with steady eyes. The Frenchman mocked him and poured wine on him as a joke. Emil woke up angry, swinging his arms in confusion. Nalo stood far away and watched with steady eyes. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, almost as if preparing itself for the moment to come. Then Nalo heard something he had been waiting for. Emil announced loudly that he would walk alone through the tall grass path because he did not need anyone to guide him like a child. The Frenchman laughed and left him alone. Emil staggered forward, his steps uneven, his voice echoing through the silent night. This was the moment Nalo had been preparing for. He walked away quietly, moving through a hidden path he had memorized. He reached the area near the tall grass before Emil arrived. He unwrapped the cloth slightly, so the smell of goat intestines flowed through the air. The hyena would smell it. The hyena would follow it. And the hyena would find the man whose cruelty had poisoned every corner of the plantation. Nalo placed the cloth near a cluster of bushes where the hyena usually approached from. He whispered softly, almost like a prayer to the night. Tonight, it ends. He hid behind a fallen tree and listened. The sound came quickly, a low growl, slow footsteps. The hyena arrived, its nose twitching fiercely. It found the cloth, tore it apart, and devoured the meat with wild hunger. Nalo stepped back and let the animal finish. Then he heard something else, the sound of footsteps, heavy, clumsy, drunk. Emil was coming. Nalo's heart tightened. The moment of vengeance had arrived, and the wild was ready to answer the cruelty of man with the justice of nature. The moon hung low over the tall grass, casting long shadows that moved like restless spirits across the land as Nalo crouched behind the fallen tree, with his heart beating in slow, steady waves that matched the rhythm of the earth. The air was heavy with silence, that strange kind of silence that comes before something dangerous steps into the world. The hyena finished the last scrap of meat, its teeth crunching loudly, its breath rough and eager. It lifted its head suddenly, ears raised, nose twitching, as it sensed something approaching. Nalo followed the direction of its stare and heard the uneven footsteps of Emil moving through the path. stumbling, muttering, laughing to himself, as if drunk joy could drown the cruelty inside him. Nalo closed his eyes for a moment and whispered to himself, "This is not revenge for me alone. This is for Cora. This is for the children. This is for the men buried under the sand with whip marks on their backs." When he opened his eyes, Emil stepped into view, swaying from side to side, dragging his feet like a man who had lost a fight with wine. His shirt was half open, his hair messy, and his voice rose in drunken insults, thrown at no one in particular. He had no idea he was walking into the center of a hunt. The hyena crouched low, its body melting into the grass like a shadow taking form. It made almost no sound, only a faint rumble deep in its chest. Nalo held his breath. He knew that if he startled the animal now, everything would be lost. The hyena began to move. Slow, silent. Each step was measured. Each inch was deliberate. Emil stopped suddenly, trying to steady himself. He looked around and frowned. The tall grass whispered as the wind touched it, but to Emil it felt like something was moving nearby. He blinked hard. He shook his head. He tried to focus. The alcohol clouded his eyes and dulled his instincts. He took another unsteady step forward. The hyena crept closer, head low, shoulders raised, ready to strike. Nalo pressed himself deeper into the shadows, making himself smaller than the night itself. The tension wrapped around him like a rope. Then it happened. Emil turned slightly, and the moonlight struck the hyena's eyes. A flash of yellow, a glint like burning metal. Emil froze. His mind tried to understand what he was seeing. His lips parted. He whispered something that sounded like a curse. The hyena asa stasunkost. Its growl tore through the night like thunder, a violent explosion of sound that shattered the heavy silence. Emil screamed, but the scream was cut short as the hyena slammed into him, claws digging into his shoulders. He fell backward, crashing into the dirt, arms flailing wildly. The hyena's jaws snapped toward his throat, missing by an inch as Emil rolled desperately to the side, kicking and crying out like a terrified child. Nalo watched with cold stillness. This was not a moment for pity. This was justice, born from the cruelty Emil had poured onto innocent backs. Emil scrambled to his knees, gasping, backing away, shouting for help that would never come. His voice cracked, his hands shook. He grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it toward the animal, but the hyena only growled louder. It moved in a circle around him, its body low, its eyes fixed on him with the focus of a born predator. Emil tried to stand but stumbled again, falling hard on his elbow. Pain shot up his arm, and he cried out. The hyena rushed forward. Its jaws snapped onto his arm with a brutal force that made Emil wail in agony. Blood poured quickly, dark and thick. The Frenchman kicked and screamed, trying to pull away, but the hyena held firm. Emil swung his free fist, hitting the animal's head, but the blow was weak and fueled by panic, not strength. The hyena released his arm suddenly and leapt back, preparing for a second strike. Emil crawled backward through the dirt, sobbing, his breath slurred, his face twisted in terror. He tried to reach for a stone. His fingers brushed it, but before he could lift it, the hyena attacked again. This time, it struck with full force. It bit into his shoulder, shaking its head violently. Emil screamed until his voice broke. His body twisted and jerked, but the hyena had him pinned. The wilderness does not show mercy. The hyena tore at him again, ripping skin, drawing more blood. Emil's strength faded quickly. His cries turned into whimpers. His movements became slow, desperate, futile. Nalo watched without blinking. Each cry from Emil reminded him of the screams of enslaved women. Each gasp reminded him of the breath leaving the bodies of men who had died under the lash. Each moment felt like a wound being closed, not opened. At last, Emil tried to speak. His mouth quivered. His voice sputtered. He whispered, "Help me. Someone help me." His eyes scanned the darkness, searching for the workers he had tormented, the people he believed were beneath him. But the night held no mercy for him. The hyena lunged again, this time biting into Emil's throat. The sound was wet and terrible. Emil's body convulsed. His hands reached upward as if trying to grab the sky itself. Then he fell still. The hyena stood over him, panting, its muzzle covered in blood, its breath heavy with the scent of victory. Nalo slowly stepped out from behind the fallen tree. His heart no longer raced. It beat with a strange calm. The hyena looked at him, its eyes still wild, its body tense. For a moment, man and beast faced each other. Two lives shaped by suffering. Two creatures who knew what it meant to live under constant threat. The hyena growled softly, not in anger but in warning. Then it turned and disappeared into the tall grass, swallowed by the night as if it had never been there. Nalo stood alone beside the lifeless body of Emil. The night breeze touched his skin, carrying the scent of blood and grass. He looked down at the man who had caused so much pain. There was no joy in his heart, only silence. And in that silence, he felt something break loose inside him, something heavy, something old. He knelt down, touched the ground, and whispered, "The wild has spoken. Justice is done." Then he rose to his feet and slipped back toward the plantation, moving like a ghost through the shadows. No one saw him return. No one heard a sound. But the night had changed. The land had changed. And the enslaved people of St. Louis were about to awaken to a morning that would shake the French settlement to its core. The morning light crept slowly across the plantation, touching the sand, the wooden huts, and the long fields where enslaved men and women usually gathered before sunrise. And as the first workers stepped out, rubbing sleep from their eyes, they noticed something strange in the air, something colder than the night that had passed, something that made the wind feel heavy and sharp. It was the kind of silence that only comes when danger is nearby. Birds that usually sang at dawn stayed hidden. Even the goats tied near the fences refused to make noise. Nalo woke before anyone else, as he always did, but this time he felt a steady calm inside him instead of the usual dread. He stepped outside and looked at the sky, breathing slowly, as if preparing himself for the storm that would soon break loose. He knew what was waiting on the narrow path through the tall grass. He knew the Frenchman would find it soon, but he did not know what would come after. No one did. The enslaved workers began their morning tasks, some sweeping the yard, others carrying water pots, others cleaning the tools, all moving with quiet, tired rhythm. But then the silence broke. A scream tore through the still air, sharp and trembling. A scream from a French soldier who had been sent to check the path leading to the tavern. The scream was followed by frantic shouting as the soldier came running back toward the settlement, his face pale, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Several French officers rushed to him, asking what had happened, but the soldier could barely speak. His voice cracked as he tried to form words. Something killed him. Something ripped him apart. Two officers lifted their rifles and ordered a group of soldiers to follow them. A few enslaved workers were also forced to join, though their eyes showed nothing but hidden curiosity. Nalo stayed behind, pretending to lift a basket of firewood, but his eyes followed the group as they marched toward the tall grass. Every step felt like the world tightening. The enslaved people murmured softly among themselves, guessing who might have died during the night. Some whispered that perhaps a thief was caught. Others said perhaps a drunk Frenchman fell on a sharp stone. But most could feel a deeper truth. Something dangerous had come into the settlement, something the French could not control. Minutes passed before the soldiers' voices rose again, louder this time, filled with horror. One shouted for more officers, another called for covering cloths, another simply cursed loudly, trying to steady his nerves. Then they began carrying the body back. They wrapped it in a thick canvas sheet, but the fabric could not hide the dark stains spreading quickly across it. French officers covered their noses as the smell of blood filled the air. The body was placed in the main yard, where the sun had begun to shine fully, and the French captain ordered 2 men to unwrap the canvas. When the cloth was pulled away, several onlookers gasped and stepped back. It was Emile Barrette, or what remained of him. His clothes were torn, his skin ripped, his neck crushed by powerful jaws. His face, once filled with arrogance, now stared lifelessly, with wide eyes frozen in fear. The plantation fell into complete silence. No one spoke, not even the Frenchman. The captain finally cleared his throat and barked orders. "Find the animal. Form search parties. Close the gates. No one leaves until we find what killed him." Nalo watched quietly from the distance. His face did not change. His hands did not shake. But deep inside, he felt something shift. The revenge he had carried inside him for so long had finally taken form. And now, that form lay broken in the middle of the plantation yard. The French officers stood around the body, whispering among themselves. Some terrified, others angry, all confused. Most refused to believe a hyena could get that close to the settlement. One insisted that someone must have brought the animal closer. Another claimed that perhaps the tall grass had grown too thick, and wild creatures had begun hiding near the path. The captain dismissed all guesses, but kept glancing at the tall grass as if waiting for another creature to leap out. The enslaved workers were ordered to continue their tasks, but none truly worked. Their eyes kept drifting toward Emile's body. Whispers spread as fast as the morning wind. Some said this was punishment from the spirits for the cruelty the overseer had shown. Others said this was the beginning of something bigger. Others believed that maybe, just maybe, the land itself had grown tired of swallowing the blood of the innocent. Cora, the woman Emile had whipped while pregnant, walked out of her hut slowly, holding her stomach. When she saw the body, she stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. For a long moment, she simply stared. Her eyes filled with a mix of shock, disbelief, and quiet relief. She lowered her head and whispered a prayer in Wolof. Nalo saw her. Their eyes met for a brief moment. She did not know what he had done. She did not know that the night had been shaped by his hands, but she felt something. Something deep. Something powerful. As the sun continued to rise, the French captain ordered the soldiers to bring dogs and search for the animal tracks. They circled the tall grass, rifles raised, hands trembling, trying to follow the trail of blood and paw prints, but hyenas move unpredictably. They circle. They double back. They cross their own trails. By the time the soldiers reached the deeper parts of the grassland, The tracks were gone, swallowed by dust and wind. The captain grew angry. He shouted at the men, accusing them of incompetence, but beneath his anger there was fear. A fear he tried to hide, but could not fully suppress. This fear grew even deeper, as some enslaved workers quietly mentioned that hyenas only attack the weak or the injured, and that a meal must have been chosen by nature itself. The French hated such talk. They despised the idea that the land they ruled could act without their permission. As the investigation continued, the captain summoned the enslaved workers one by one, questioning them harshly. He asked if anyone had seen a wild animal. He asked if anyone had heard strange noises during the night. He asked if anyone had walked the tall grass path. The workers answered carefully. No one mentioned Nalo. No one suspected him, and Nalo himself remained calm, answering each question with the quiet obedience the French expected to see from him. His voice did not shake. His eyes did not wander. His hands stayed steady. The captain found nothing, but the French settlement was no longer the same. Rumors spread that a monster roamed the outskirts. Some Frenchmen refused to walk alone at night. Some locked their doors tight, even during the day. Some whispered that Emil's death was a sign that the enslaved people might rise up. Fear clung to the French quarters like a shadow, while the enslaved quarters held something different. Quiet hope. A tiny, fragile spark that no one dared to speak aloud, but everyone felt. It was the first time in many years that the workers had seen a cruel man fall without them lifting a hand. It was the first time the French had looked unsure of themselves. It was the first time the land seemed to breathe with them instead of against them. Nalo returned to his daily tasks without drawing attention, but he felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. Not human eyes, something else. As night approached again, he stepped toward the river, the same hidden path he had walked many times. He listened for the creature he had fed, the creature that had become an instrument of justice. But this time, the bushes were silent. The hyena did not appear. The night had swallowed it completely. Nalo stood there a long time, listening, waiting, wondering if the bond he created would ever return again. The wild had done its part, but the wild does not stay where men want it to. It comes when it chooses. It leaves when it chooses. Nalo turned back toward the plantation with a heavy but steady heart. He knew the French were fearful now, but fear can turn into anger, and anger can turn into punishment. The death of Emile Barrette was not the end of trouble. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. The French would look for someone to blame. They would not accept that nature had acted on its own. In their minds, someone had to suffer for this. Someone had to pay. And as the night deepened and the shadows stretched long, Nalo sensed a storm approaching. A storm not of rain and thunder, but of suspicion, cruelty, and desperate men seeking control in a land that no longer obeyed them. The sun had barely risen when the French captain gathered every enslaved worker in the main yard, his face twisted with anger as he paced in front of them with his boots stamping against the sandy ground. And the workers stood shoulder to shoulder, their heads lowered, their breaths sharp and uneasy, because everyone knew that the death of Emile could not pass without punishment, not in a place where the French believed fear was the only language the enslaved understood. The captain held a whip in one hand and shouted that a wild animal could not have wandered so close to the French settlement unless someone had brought it there, and he accused the workers of conspiring, hiding, or feeding the creature. No one spoke. No one moved. They all knew that even a single word spoken carelessly could bring deadly consequences. Nalo stood in the middle of the crowd, silent, breathing slowly, controlling every movement of his face so that no fear, no satisfaction, no emotion would reveal itself. Inside his chest, his heart beat like a quiet drum, steady and controlled, the way a hunter's heart must beat when surrounded by danger. The captain ordered the soldiers to search every hut. They tore through the sleeping spaces, throwing mats and blankets aside, spilling water pots, kicking cooking bowls, scattering the few personal belongings the enslaved people had managed to keep. In Cora's hut, they overturned everything, even though she was heavily pregnant and struggling to remain on her feet. When she cried out softly, the captain slapped her, telling her to stay silent. Nalo looked at her but did not move. He could not move. Not yet. The soldiers found nothing. No trace of meat. No bloody cloth. No signs of someone luring an animal. The captain grew angrier with each passing minute, his voice rising until even the birds stayed hidden. He ordered the workers to line up in rows of 5. Then he began to question them one by one. Nalo watched several men tremble under the captain's gaze. Some stuttered when answering simple questions. Others stared at the ground and whispered that they had seen nothing. When the captain reached Nalo, he paused. He studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read something hidden beneath the calm expression on his face. He asked Nalo where he had been during the night. Nalo answered softly that he had been sleeping like everyone else. The captain narrowed his eyes. He asked if Nalo had ever seen a hyena near the plantation. Nalo said that hyenas sometimes came near the river, but never close enough to enter the settlement. The captain stepped closer and stared directly into Nalo's eyes as if searching for a crack. Nalo stared back with the same steady calm he had learned as a boy when his father taught him that animals sense fear, and so do men who behave like animals. The captain finally looked away and moved on, but Nalo could feel the suspicion lingering in the air, like smoke. After questioning everyone, the captain announced that no one would leave the plantation for several days. No one would go to the river alone. No one would walk the tall grass path. Curfew began at sunset. The French officers would patrol the area. They claimed this was for safety, but the enslaved people knew the truth. It was fear. Pure fear. And fear makes cruel men even crueler. That afternoon, the captain gathered the French soldiers and ordered them to search the outskirts for the hyena. They marched with rifles raised, moving through the tall grasses and along the river banks, poking at bushes with long sticks, stepping loudly as if trying to scare something out. But the wilderness did not answer. No footprints, no droppings, no broken branches, no signs of a den. The hyena was gone. The captain cursed loudly, calling the animal a demon sent to test the French. He blamed the workers again and vowed to watch them day and night. Nalo heard these words with quiet understanding. The more the French searched, the more frustrated they became. Frustration could turn into violence at any moment. That night, the enslaved quarters were unusually silent. No children cried. No one whispered. Everyone listened for footsteps, expecting soldiers to appear at any moment. In the darkness, Nalo sat outside his hut, staring at the sky. He thought about the hyena, wondering if it even remembered him, or if it had returned to the deep wilderness, where the French had no power. A small voice spoke behind him. It was Cora. She stood with her hands on her swollen stomach, her face tired, but filled with quiet strength. She whispered that she had seen the way He watched the path the day Emil died. She whispered that she knew the land had listened to him, even if she did not understand how. Nalo kept his eyes on the sky. He said he only wished for justice. She nodded. Justice is needed, she said, but justice brings danger when it touches the wrong men. Be careful, Nalo. They will not forgive the death of their own. Nalo turned to her and asked how the child was. She smiled faintly, placing her hand over her belly. The child was quiet but still alive. She whispered that she prayed every day that the child would be born into a world with less pain. Nalo felt a heaviness in his heart. He wondered if justice ever came without cost. The next morning, the captain returned with even more anger. He claimed the enslaved people were hiding something. He claimed there must be a leader among them encouraging rebellion. He pointed at several men and ordered them tied to wooden posts. Nalo felt the ground shift beneath him. This was the moment he feared most. The French needed someone to blame, and now they had chosen. The soldiers grabbed the men and tied them tightly. They begged that they had done nothing wrong. One cried out for mercy. Another shouted that he had a wife and child. The captain ignored them. He raised his whip. Nalo felt something old and heavy inside him stir again, deeper than anger. He clenched his fists as the whip cracked through the air. The first man screamed. His back split open. Blood ran down his skin. The second man tried to struggle, but a soldier struck him across the face with a rifle. The captain whipped him again and again. He shouted that someone must confess. Someone must tell how the hyena found Emil. But the truth had no voice, because the truth lived only in Nalo's mind, locked away behind calm eyes. More men were whipped. The screams grew louder. The enslaved workers watched helplessly. Even some French soldiers looked uneasy. Nalo felt as if his chest was tightening with each cry. He wanted to stand. He wanted to speak. He wanted to end the suffering he caused. But he also knew the truth. If he stepped forward now, the captain would not stop at whipping him. They would torture him. They would hang him. And they would hunt down anyone connected to him. The French would unleash a storm that would destroy every life he cared about. Justice had been served. But now, the price of that justice was circling back like a shadow hunting its source. Nalo closed his eyes for a moment, fighting the war inside his heart. He had used the wild to punish a cruel man, but the wild had no loyalty. It did not protect him from the consequences that men would create. By midday, the punishment stopped. The captain grew tired. The men tied to the posts were untied, bloody and trembling, barely able to walk. Several women helped carry them away. The captain looked at the workers and shouted that this was only the beginning. If anyone spoke to the wild animal, fed it, or tried to use it again, the entire plantation would burn. The enslaved workers stood in terrified silence, but in the middle of that fear, one truth remained unspoken. Emil was dead. The cruel overseer who beat pregnant women, who humiliated the weak, who believed himself untouchable, was gone. And though the price was being paid in pain, the enslaved people still felt something the French could not understand. Relief. That night, the French guards patrolled with lanterns around the plantation, their rifles loaded, their voices low, their eyes twitching at every sound from the grasslands. Nalo walked past them silently, pretending to fetch water, pretending to obey, pretending to be just another weary worker. But inside him, something was changing. He could not allow innocent men to keep suffering for what he had done. He could not watch the French whip people hoping to force a confession. He could not let Cora bring a child into a world where her safety depended on silence. And he knew that the only way to end the suspicion was to lead the danger away from the plantation. Not the danger of the French, the danger of truth, the truth of what he had done, the truth of the bond he had formed with the wild. Nalo stood alone in the darkness near the river and whispered into the night, "If the wild helped me take a life, then I must use the wild to protect the living." The wind carried his words across the water. In that moment, Nalo understood something he had not realized before. The revenge was not finished. It had only changed shape. The night settled over the land with a strange heaviness, a pressure that clung to the skin and seemed to listen to every breath. And Nalo felt that same pressure in his chest as he walked away from the huts and toward the quiet riverbank, where the moonlight shimmered like a silver blade cutting through the darkness, and the air smelled of mud, grass, and quiet danger. The voices of the French guards drifted faintly behind him as they patrolled with lanterns, muttering among themselves about shadows, spirits, and the beast that had killed Emil. Some were afraid to even say the word hyena, because they feared calling it might summon it. Nalo stepped into the softer sand near the water and looked toward the trees where he usually met the hyena. The night was still. Too still. He whispered softly, calling the animal the way he had on other nights. But the darkness gave him nothing in return. Only silence. He waited, listening to the wind move through the tall grass. But no rustle came from the bushes, no soft growl, no clicking of claws. It was as if the hyena had vanished from the world completely. Nalo closed his eyes and whispered again, but more quietly this time, more desperately, as if begging the wild itself to answer. But the wild had moved on, and Nalo realized that he had created something powerful, but unpredictable, and now that power moved without his guidance. He could not summon it. He could not control it. He could only hope it did not return to bring more danger to the plantation. The French captain had already declared that if another attack happened, he would tie every man in the yard and whip them until someone confessed. Nalo knew he could not let that happen. He had carried the weight of justice alone, but now the weight was shifting. It threatened to crush everyone around him. The hyena had become a shadow that followed him, even when the animal itself was gone. As he stood under the moonlight, Nalo remembered his father's words from long ago. A hunter never calls the wild unless he is ready to pay what the wild demands. Nalo had called, and now he would pay. He turned away from the river and walked into the tall grass, deeper than he had ever gone alone. The grass scratched his legs. The night song of insects grew louder. The darkness seemed to close around him like a living thing, pressing in, testing him. He listened for any sign of breath, any sign of movement. Nothing. He whispered, "You have eaten your justice. Now you must leave this place. Leave the people. Leave the settlement." The wind carried his words across the field, but brought no reply. He took another step, then another, until his feet reached a patch of earth where the grass was bent, the soil disturbed, and faint tracks marked the ground. Hyena tracks. He crouched down, running his fingers gently over the indentations. The tracks were deep, fresh, and spaced widely as if the animal had been running, not toward the settlement, away from it. The hyena had fled. Perhaps it sensed the danger the French soldiers brought, Perhaps it had eaten enough. Perhaps it simply returned to the deeper wilderness, where men did not walk. Nalo breathed a long, slow breath. The weight on his chest loosened slightly, but not enough to bring peace, because escaping suspicion would not be so easy. Back at the plantation, the enslaved workers were restless, whispering through the night, wondering if the French planned more punishment in the morning. Some worried they might be forced to form search parties. Others feared the captain would hang someone to make an example. Fear passed from hut to hut like a silent ghost. When Nalo finally returned, the guard stopped him and demanded to know where he had been. He told them he had been fetching water from the river. One soldier narrowed his eyes and stepped closer, shining his lantern directly into Nalo's face. The soldier studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside and let him pass. But suspicion clung to the man's eyes. Nalo entered his hut and sat down on the dirt floor, breathing slowly. He felt the ache of decisions weighing on him. He had wanted justice for Cora, justice for himself, justice for all the suffering Emil had caused. But he had not expected the price of that justice to be so steep. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the night, listening to the guard's footsteps, listening to the wind that moved through the grass, like a whispering voice. At dawn, the French captain gathered the workers again, shouting that the soldiers had found tracks near the tall grass, but lost them deeper in the wilderness. He claimed the animal might still be nearby. He ordered the workers to clear a wider path, cutting down the grass so the hyena could not hide. The work was harsh. The sun was cruel, and the workers were exhausted from lack of sleep. Nalo worked silently, swinging his blade through the grass with slow and steady strokes, but the captain's eyes kept drifting toward him. Finally, the captain stepped forward and shouted at him. "You, why do you work so quietly? Why do you look at the ground? Why do you always stand apart?" Nalo did not raise his head. He answered in simple words, "Because quiet work is the fastest work." The captain slapped him across the face, shouting that he must speak louder. Nalo remained calm. He did not flinch. He did not blink. This made the captain even angrier. He ordered Nalo to stand before him. The workers stopped. The air thinned. The captain said that someone had to be responsible for the animal attack. Someone had to know how a hyena moved so close to the settlement without being seen. Someone had to understand the wild well enough to use it. And he stared at Nalo as he said these words. The captain ordered 2 soldiers to step forward. They grabbed Nalo by the arms. The workers watched in helpless silence. Some covered their mouths. Others prayed. Even children felt the tension rising in the air. The captain said he would put Nalo in the holding shed until he confessed. He said no one could know the wild, as well as a man who had lived among hunters. He said Nalo had the look of someone hiding something. But before the soldiers dragged him away, an old voice spoke. Arame, the elderly man who had warned Nalo before, stepped forward with trembling legs and shouted that Nalo could not have done anything because he had slept beside him that night. The captain turned sharply. He shouted at Aram to be silent, but Aram did not stop. He insisted that Nalo had not left his hut. He insisted that he would swear this truth, even if they whipped him to death. The captain hesitated. He looked at Aram's thin frame, his wrinkled face, his shaking hands, and he saw a man too weak to fight, too old to lie boldly. Nalo felt a strange pain in his chest as he watched the old man defend him. He had not asked for this. He did not want another person to suffer because of his choices. The captain finally ordered the soldiers to release Nalo, but he warned that one wrong step, one strange movement, one suspicious act would bring chains and the whip. Nalo nodded quietly and stepped back into the crowd. Aram's eyes met his, filled with silent understanding and silent fear. When the workers returned to their tasks, Cora approached Nalo slowly. Her steps were careful. Her breathing was heavy. She whispered that the captain would not stop watching him. She whispered that danger had not left. It had only changed shape. Nalo watched the movement of the soldiers, the way they scanned the grass, the way their hands tightened on their rifles. He could feel the tension in the air, like a storm gathering. That night, after the guards had passed for the third time, Nalo slipped out again. Not toward the river this time, toward the deeper fields where no one was allowed to go. He walked into the tall grass until the lanterns disappeared completely behind him. He called softly for the hyena again, but the darkness answered only with wind. He stood alone, the night wrapped around him like a cloak, and he realized something he had not understood before. The wild had helped him deliver justice, but now the wild could not help him escape the consequences. He had to decide what to do next. Stay silent and let suspicion grow until someone else suffered, or find a way to turn the French captain's fear back against him. As he stood there alone, a faint sound touched his ears. A low growl. He froze. The grass rustled. The hyena stepped into the moonlight, its eyes glowing, its body stronger than before. It stared at him for a long moment, its head tilted, as if remembering him. Nalo whispered, "You must leave this place." But the hyena did not move. It took a slow step forward, then another. Nalo felt the weight of the wild pressing against his heart again, not as an enemy, not as a friend, as something ancient and unpredictable. Something that had already changed his life once, and might change it again. The night around him felt alive, holding its breath. Nalo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of dried fish left from earlier. He placed it on the ground and stepped back. The hyena approached and ate it calmly. Then it lifted its head and looked toward the plantation, as if sensing the fear that still lingered there. Nalo whispered again, but more urgently this time. "Go. Leave. Do not return. If you return, they will kill everyone." The hyena stared at him for one long moment, its eyes cold and intelligent. Then it turned slowly and melted into the grass, disappearing like smoke carried by the wind. Nalo watched until the night swallowed the last flicker of movement. For the first time in days he felt a small glimmer of hope, but hope in a land ruled by cruel men is fragile. As he turned to walk back toward the huts, he did not know that something far worse waited for him, something he could not avoid, something that would push him to the edge of life and death. The dawn rose slow and uncertain over the plantation, as if even the sun feared what the day would bring. And Nalo walked back toward the huts, with the weight of endless shadows pressing behind him, knowing that something dark had been waiting for him long before the hyena ever appeared. He reached the sleeping quarters, just as the guards were changing positions, and he slipped through the small opening between two huts, his steps careful and silent. But before he could enter his own hut, he heard a sharp voice behind him, and the sound of boots crunching against the sand. The French captain approached, with 2 soldiers at his side, their rifles pointed downward but ready. and the captain's eyes blazed with suspicion, sharper than any blade. He said he had seen Nalo leaving the huts late at night and demanded to know where he had been. Nalo kept his voice calm and answered that he had gone to relieve himself near the far trees. The captain stepped closer, his face twisted with anger, shouting that Nalo had been seen near the river before, that he was too quiet, too calm, too controlled, and that such behavior belonged to a man hiding something. Nalo stood still, breathing softly, showing no fear. This made the captain even angrier. He ordered the soldiers to seize him, and before Nalo could react, they grabbed him, twisted his arms behind his back, and dragged him across the yard toward the holding shed. The enslaved workers watched helplessly, their eyes wide with fear, their hands trembling but unable to intervene because the French carried rifles and cruelty like second skins. Aram tried to step forward again, but a soldier pushed him so hard that he fell to the ground. Cora cried out, clutching her stomach, begging the captain to leave Nalo alone. But the captain ignored her and shouted that anyone who interfered would be locked up as well. They threw Nalo into the shed and slammed the wooden door shut. Darkness swallowed him. The only sound was his own breathing and the echo of footsteps fading away. Hours passed. The heat inside the shed rose like a furnace. Sweat dripped down his back. His wrists burned from the ropes. He listened to the muffled voices outside and realized the captain was meeting with other French officers near the courtyard. Their voices rose in anger. Some demanded punishment. Some demanded answers. Some demanded that Nalo be made an example. As the sun climbed higher, the workers were forced to gather again. The captain shouted that Nalo would be flogged until he confessed how the hyena reached the settlement. The workers begged silently, with their eyes, for Nalo to remain strong, though they knew that strength meant pain, and pain could break even the most powerful men. The soldiers dragged Nalo out of the shed and forced him to his knees in the center of the courtyard. They tied his hands to a wooden post. The captain raised the whip and announced that if Nalo refused to speak, he would be whipped until he bled enough to attract the same beast that had killed Emil. Nalo lifted his head slowly and stared at the captain with calm eyes. That calmness unsettled the Frenchman more than any scream could have. The captain swung the whip. The first strike tore into Nalo's back with a sharp, burning sting. His muscles tightened, but he did not cry out. The second blow cut across the first. Blood rose to the surface. Still he did not speak. The captain grew frustrated and whipped him again and again until the workers turned away in horror. Children began to cry. Several women covered their faces. Even some French soldiers shifted uncomfortably, but Nalo did not break. The captain paused to catch his breath, breathing hard like a man who could not believe the quiet strength standing before him. He shouted that no enslaved man could endure such pain without help from the wild spirits. He shouted that Nalo must be cursed. He raised the whip again, but before it fell, a sudden scream echoed across the yard, not from a human mouth, from the tall grass at the edge of the field. A deep, low, rattling growl followed. The guards froze. The workers froze. Even the captain froze with the whip still raised in his hand. The growl grew louder, vibrating through the air like distant thunder rolling across the land. The hyena emerged from the grass. Its eyes glowed yellow in the morning sun. Its coat bristled. Its jaws were stained with old blood. It moved with a slow, deliberate confidence, its paws pressing into the sand without fear. The soldiers raised their rifles immediately. The captain shouted for them not to shoot until he gave the command, but their hands shook. Their breath quickened. The hyena stepped closer. 10 steps. 8 steps. 6 steps. The workers backed away. Some whispered prayers. The captain screamed for the soldiers to aim, but the hyena did not look at them. It looked only at Nalo. It stood between him and the Frenchman, as if sensing the violence in the air, as if sensing the pain, as if remembering the scent of the man who fed it when it was wounded and starving. The captain panicked. He shouted for all soldiers to fire, but before he could finish the command, the hyena lunged at him, rising in a sudden explosion of movement. Soldiers fired wildly, bullets ripping through the air, but the shots missed as the animal struck the captain with full force, knocking him onto his back. He screamed in terror. Soldiers fired again, but the hyena rolled away with lightning speed, its jaws snapping fiercely. Nalo struggled against the ropes as chaos erupted. Workers scattered, running for their huts. Soldiers stumbled backward, trying to reload. The captain crawled across the sand, shouting for someone to kill the beast. The hyena charged at the nearest soldier, grabbing his leg in its jaws and dragging him to the ground. The man screamed, kicking desperately. Another soldier struck the hyena with the butt of his rifle, but the animal spun and slashed his arm with its teeth. Blood sprayed across the sand. The captain reached for his own pistol, trying to steady his trembling hand long enough to fire. The hyena turned toward him again. Nalo pulled against the ropes until they cut into his skin. He shouted for the beast to leave, to run, to return to the wilderness. But the hyena was lost in instinct now. It had tasted human violence once, and now surrounded by shouting, fear, and blood, it moved like a creature born from the earth itself. The captain fired his pistol. The shot cracked through the yard. The bullet struck the hyena's shoulder. The animal stumbled, but did not fall. It roared in pain and hurled itself forward, its jaws opening wide. Soldiers fired again. This time, a bullet struck the hyena's chest. Another struck its side. The hyena collapsed onto the sand, breathing heavily. Blood spread quickly beneath it. Nalo felt something break inside him. The hyena, the creature that had once limped out of the bushes, hungry and afraid, the creature that had become the weapon of justice against Emil, now lay dying under the burning sun. The captain staggered to his feet, his hair wild, his eyes filled with madness. He shouted that the beast would burn, that its death would purify the settlement. He ordered the soldiers to tie Nalo to the post again, but before the soldiers reached him, Arame stepped between them and shouted, with all the strength left in his thin body, that they could not hurt Nalo, because the beast had attacked the French, not the enslaved. The captain struck Aram across the face. The old man fell hard to the ground. Cora cried out and ran to him, kneeling beside him with tears streaming down her cheeks. The workers gathered around, refusing to move. The captain yelled at them to step back. They did not. Something had shifted in the air. The hyena lay still, its breathing shallow. The workers did not fear it. They feared the French, but now the French were trembling. Soldiers stood unsure, rifles raised but not steady. The captain shouted again, but his voice cracked. Cora lifted her face, filled with rage and grief, and she pointed at the hyena and screamed that the wild had acted because heaven had grown tired of watching innocent blood fall. Her voice echoed with a power the French did not expect from a woman they had beaten and ignored. The workers murmured loudly, their fear melting into something else. Something dangerous. Something like unity. The soldiers exchanged nervous glances. The captain realized he was losing control. He screamed for everyone to return to work or face death. But as he stepped forward, he stumbled over the body of the dying hyena. Its last breath rattled out from its chest, and its eyes dimmed. The wild had spoken its final word. At that moment, Nalo felt the ropes around his wrists loosen. Arame, trembling and bleeding, had crawled to the post and cut the ropes with a small, sharpened bone he kept hidden in his clothing. Nalo stood slowly, his back bleeding, his mind spinning between life and death. The workers formed a wall behind him. The soldiers hesitated, unsure if firing into the crowd would spark a rebellion. The captain pointed his pistol at Nalo, but before he could pull the trigger, the ground shook with the sound of something approaching. Hooves. Many hooves. A French officer from the main fort rode into the courtyard with a group of mounted soldiers behind him. The captain lowered his pistol immediately. The officer announced that word had reached the fort about the death of Emile and the disturbances at the plantation. He demanded an explanation. The captain stammered, pointing at the dead hyena and at Nalo, but the officer ignored him and walked toward the workers instead. He examined the wounded men tied earlier. He saw the pregnant woman crying. He saw the fear in their eyes. Then he turned slowly to the captain and said coldly that the French crown did not tolerate unnecessary cruelty because it weakened production and invited rebellion. The officer declared that the captain was suspended. The soldiers seized him. The workers watched as he was dragged away, screaming that he was only doing his duty. The officer turned to the enslaved workers and ordered the soldiers to clean the yard. The hyena's body was carried to the riverbank and buried. Nalo stood silently among the workers, his back burning, his breaths trembling. Cora approached him slowly and placed her hand on his arm, whispering that justice had taken a long road, but it had arrived. Aram smiled weakly from where he sat, exhausted but alive. The officer mounted his horse and ordered that a new overseer would arrive soon, one less violent, one more cautious. Then he rode away with his men. As the sound of hooves faded into the distance, the workers looked at Nalo, their eyes filled with quiet understanding. They did not know all he had done. They did not know every detail, but they knew the wild had risen for him, and they knew that he had carried the weight of their suffering in a way no one else dared to. Nalo looked at the tall grass, where the hyena had vanished into the night so many times before. He whispered a soft farewell. The wild had come to him when he needed it, and now the wild had returned to the earth. That night, the sky was calm. No fear, no shouts, no lantern swinging through the dark. Only the slow breathing of a people who had survived another day. Nalo lay on his mat, staring at the roof of his hut. The pain in his back, throbbing, but the weight in his heart, lighter than it had ever been. Freedom was still far away. But something had changed in the land. Something powerful. Something dangerous. Something alive. And Nalo knew that as long as he carried the memory of the hyena, he would never again fear the cruelty of men. The wild had shown him what strength could rise from suffering. It had shown him how justice could move silently through the night. And in the darkest corners of the French settlement, the story of the hyena that avenged the enslaved began to spread in whispers. Whispers that no French order could silence. Whispers that lived longer than pain. Whispers that made the enslaved lift their heads a little higher. Whispers that reminded them that even in the deepest darkness, the wild could still rise and answer the cries of the forgotten. Before you go, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, your city and your country? If you enjoyed this powerful story and you have not subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button and like this video. We invite you to support our work by joining our membership. Your support helps our team continue the rigorous research required to bring forgotten histories like this to light. Our PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee links are available in our channel description if you would like to send us any gift or donation. Thank you for your love and support. We do not take it for granted. Keep watching, and we will keep bringing you the stories they never wanted us to know.